I feel that I don't have to speak because the congressman just did for us. It was pretty spectacular, I think, his grasp of, the economy and what's happening. And I just want to thank everybody for being here today, and specifically the congressman for, coming in and I think already having a great grasp of what this marketplace and what this upcoming economy is looking like and how we can all participate. So again, kudos to him for the grasp of this. And also, I think the advocacy he's suggesting for public policy is, on target. And I think he covers a lot of our area. So I don't know how I'm going to reach both of these. But I want to start with how I got here. So we were just talking 10 years ago. I've been a serial entrepreneur my whole life, but 10 years ago, the mayor of our town asked me to come work for him, and I, of course, said no for months and months, and then I ended up going to work for him. I was the director of grants and development for the city of Pittsburgh, got to do all kind of really fun things across all sectors, got to work with all the universities, all the labor unions, like every sector of our community, and you got to strap on everybody's issues and problems. But the long and short is, so every Thursday we'd have this session on new initiatives. One of the things that happened is after I left, because my mayor died of a brain tumor, I started looking at what I saw and learned in government, and I think there's a lesson, and anybody in government knows this. So you have complicated issues and problems, and the issue is how do you solve them in a single solution set. So we can't do 50 things, but we can do one, and if you did one and it solves 60 problems, then isn't that a good thing? So I started thinking that way. How do you actually come up with solution sets that are inclusive, include everybody, and can, by the way, everybody likes them, right? So that's what happened here. Is I started working with Carnegie Mellon University on a couple of projects, helping their startups with their first customer, the placement outside of the university setting. After a number of years, I noticed every single one of them was making their products overseas. So I saw that as the problem statement, which is, in fact, they were defining successes. I'm now making my products in China. I am a success. And I thought, wow, isn't that sad? We don't think it's success to make our products here. The other factors that were going into that is the sequester was happening, DoD spending. So all that R&D that used to keep our products made here had to go into commercialization, and all these things were happening. You had the recession, the sequester, the DoD spending, and all of a sudden I saw a lot of things that used to be made here going overseas into commercialization. So, and it was stated here, but I have just 3 quick slides that are from the Congressional Research Service, and I think this is important to look at, and primarily because when we think about the U.S. no longer having manufacturing, that's just not true. We are still a global leader. It's just China happened to have surpassed us at this point. And it happened right here in 2011, as far as the shares of manufacturing value. So in 2011, we went from being at the top to second. So it doesn't mean we don't have manufacturing, and it doesn't mean it's not happening. It's an incredibly significant part of our economy. It's just as a portion of GDP, it's less than some of these other countries. So I show these because this is also the one that I think is really important. So this is the change in value added in manufacturing. And if you see, so China has just been rising at that level, 40%, and whereas the U.S. is at 5%. But we are talking about, we have a much more diverse economy, but manufacturing is still vitally important, as well as it's vitally important for national security, as we all know. So what we looked at is, if I could just look at the startups that are in front of us, these really smart CMU companies, and say, what would it take for us to make your product here? What would it look like for us to connect you to a local supply chain? What would it look like for us to just help you with your earliest small batches? How might we solve that? And so that was part of what we talked about is as a goal statement, let's just develop a systemic framework for startup, local, and domestic manufacturing. And if you think about it, why haven't we been doing that for the last 30 or 40 years? Why have we ceded that to overseas markets? Why haven't we made that something that we care about? We care about entrepreneurship. We have all kind of entrepreneurship programs, but we just haven't focused on domestic manufacturing. We haven't done investment. We haven't focused. So the other thing that I thought was interesting is we were on this path and along came our awareness of the maker movement. And to me, this was the magic secret sauce that was going to change everything, because it was a trend that was doing all these really spectacular things. So what we did is we focused on teaching startup manufacturing, teach people how to make products, and put those pieces of the framework together. We invited the village, all the sectors that are out there, and said, let's come on in, because here's what's happening. This emerging stuff that's going to happen is going to keep happening faster and at a more accelerated pace. So we know that disruptions are happening daily. So how would you contextualize kind of the village, whether it's your city, your state, your U.S., and say these things are happening? Why don't we have a structure that's prepared for these kind of emerging disruptions? So we talk about the next economy, third industrial revolution. You've heard that term. When you add another whole group of items to it, it becomes what's called Industry 4.0. So you probably have heard those terms. But the next industrial revolution, so a lot of folks believe the democratization of tools and the move from manufacturing from atoms to bits, the digitization of that is how we define the third industrial revolution, the Etsy ability to make sure that product firms have very inexpensive ways to sell products. So whereas Industry 4.0 is now connecting all those machines and adding big data and intelligence to that, and how infrastructure and sensing systems attach. What this leads to, though, is small batch mass customization. And behind us in the room is Boxy. And this is a product that, when I used to do this presentation 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I used to say, someday there's going to be this multi-tool, and it's going to be on your desktop in your home, and it's going to be both a 3D printer and a CNC router that made my phone case, by the way. Boxy made my phone case. And it also laser etches, and those are the three functions this does. And when they did their Kickstarter, they were Pittsburgh's largest Kickstarter. They raised $1.2 million and had to produce 600 units. But what they are is, I never expected that equipment to be developed right at our elbow in the same site that we worked with. So we've been working with Boxy on the development of this multi-tool. And the idea behind this is you'd be able to buy these in Lowe's and Home Depot, as well as Staples and anywhere else, right? So how do we now connect our laptop to this, and we can now make whatever? You download a file, and there you go, right? Additive, subtractive, and laser, ultimately etching, cutting. So I liken that to craft beer, and we all know about craft beer and what's happened if you're a beer drinker. But I just show this very quickly because everybody says, well, how will that replace this mass market? So we can look at craft beer leading the way and say, well, craft beer is the example of rising, right? So it's small batch localized manufacturing, and it's rising. So if you would have believed, if I were to, have said to my parents, hey, I'm going to make a craft beer and I'm going to go compete with Budweiser, everybody would have said, you're crazy, you're not going to make it. But what we know is because it's small, it's localized, and name like Goose Island, which starts out that way, that then becomes a national brand. So, craft starts rising, and it's a more discerning customer, it's a higher end brand, and it's a certain kind of marketplace that buys that. So we developed a program, and I loved when Congressman Ryan was talking about this. So how do we teach people how to make a living at making? Well, the last 3 years, that's exactly what we've done. We've took unemployed people, and we trained them how to be the first, second, and third hire for a startup company. So not only did we teach startups how to make their products, we taught people who were unemployed how they needed the skills to go be the first, second, and third hire. So Boxy, we were just talking about this, hired, I think 8 when he needed to get started and make 600 units. And to this day, he's retained, 5. We were sitting there trying to do head count on who's still there years later. So, but the point being, we take a group of folks who had never done this, and we always consider they had some skill, some depth of knowledge. I would even argue the people who were graphic artists and knew how to do 3D already, they were perfect for this. But, and as we talked about, they ultimately end up with a whole different skill set that can connect to the gig economy or full-time employment and everything in between. We did get and make this a nationally recognized U.S. Department of Labor registered apprenticeship called the Maker Professional. And we've been scaling in other cities, and just found out we are finalists in the military competition with the, it's coming up this weekend. So it would be for military folks who are leaving. Military now has a lot of maker spaces and would train for that. So here's the manufacturing center of the future, and it's coming to a household near you. And of course, what it will do is create millions of manufacturers, and that will be the next economy when you have this with a boxy unit at your home, and you can do these things by downloading files, creating your own, and that's the kind of economy we're talking about. So it will be disruptive. When people say, how disruptive? Think about the internet. Not so much at first, right? Certain people used it, others didn't. Some people said, oh, I don't need to use that. But over a period of 10, 20 years, it continues to change everything in terms of how we operate as an operating system, as an economy. So if you can think through that. So where will you be? And so these are the things we looked at as far as what product startups need. And these are the kinds of things that we've developed in terms of how you look at startups and say, how do I help you move to where you need to go? Patient capital is one of the things I would mention. The moment any equity funding happens, that's the first group who wants to put them overseas. Watch Shark Tank once and you'll hear it. I have my manufacturer, ooh, you know, right? Nobody in equity funding wants anybody to set up manufacturing. So identifying patient pools of capital are one of the most critical components. And by the way, I've worked a lot with the organized labor. They have $8 trillion to invest every day, and they spend all their day advocating this, and their $8 trillion isn't necessarily reconciled. So go have a conversation with your labor guys about their $8 trillion that they could put into this as well. So I don't want to keep going on because I feel like I am, but these are the elements that we came up with. Is you've got to train folks on how to do it, the capital that they need, the talent that they need, facilities for early stage. You know, we'll talk a little bit, Mike will, about the kind of facility we're talking about, a small batch, mass customized facility. So I would say it's beyond makerspace. We saw in a makerspace, you know, Joel did, and the moment his prototype was done and he needed to now make 600 units, now what, now where? You know, and in some instances, contract manufacturers would have talked to him and would have made them, but he wanted to self-manufacture in the earliest stages so he could keep doing iteration and development. So what would it look like to have shared, what we call manufacturing co-working spaces, shared set of tools, so like makerspace, but small batch facility spaces and with precision equipment. So some of our policy recommendations, so invest in the startup manufacturing infrastructure. And I was, again, so thrilled to hear Congressman Ryan. He really understands this. This is the next economy. So how do we make sure that startup manufacturing is a focus? It is the bridge between make and manufacture. It is the commercialization of, call it the application of STEM, right? If STEM is learning these things, this is the application of that. So this is the commercialization, and the economic value proposition of all that learning is right here in invention and in startup commercialization. So incorporate, I'm not going to go through all these, but the supply chain data we talked about, sharing that into a sharing economy model for U.S. competitiveness, and the gig economy, which again, Congressman Ryan nailed it. You know, why do we support gig economy instead of saying it's a bad thing? So we created this thing called the Maker Bench. We actually, after we place somebody into employment, so we operate like a real apprentice program. After we place somebody in employment and they come back, we place them again with another startup. And they may do 3 or 4 or 5 placements. We had one do 9 placements. And the last one he's with, they wanted somebody 40 hours a week. And full-time, and so he helped them commercialize their hydro turbine products. So they now made him an equity partner, and he looks like he's got a home. But he didn't get all those placements because he was bad. He got all those placements because he was good, and he was able to help startups very quickly meet the challenges that they had. Sorry about that. So align agencies, of course. Right now, this military competition, we have Department of Labor and DOD, and when you start combining agencies, Commerce has been incredibly supportive as far as like how that aligns with labor, because this is workforce development, this is economic development, kind of connected. And rethink what successful investment. So when we started this, we believed that, like everybody, the successful startup is the one that's going to scale to 200 to 300 employees. And by the way, we have one of those. It's an autonomous robotics firm from CMU, and they need 50 people by January 1st and another 10 to 20 every month for all of next year. So we're thrilled that that's one of our companies, and we're going to be able to tell that story. But the story I would tell you is the one of the other 200 startups that we now call lifestyle makers, the 1 to 10 people firms that now create a really diversified economy, and that we should really be thinking about how do we support that economy, not look for that one winner that's going to be the runaway story we love to tell, but really the economy that isn't going to go away when that equity partner decides, let's move it to Boston, and that happens all the time to us. What would it look like for us to support this universe of localized makers and support that economy and start rethinking the whole incubator model and accelerator model, and instead of bringing in equity funds who just want to make sure it goes somewhere else, let's support it here and now in community and create that local economy. So those funding requirements are different then. The shared tools would actually be the way to create that vibrant ecosystem, so makerspace and beyond. So makerspace is what I'd call great for prototyping, but think through what is beyond that. So it's the shared tooling for the shared manufacturing co-working. It's a part of the missing infrastructure we don't have in this country, and I would maintain every community needs one or 20 so that they can be making their products as well. So the front door for new products, if all these disruptions are going to be happening all the time, what would it look like to start changing the government to manage it? We work all the time with startups that can't scale because of regulatory hurdles. If you're going to have the Ubers of the world showing up and disrupting the way the status quo works, so where is the government front door that says, let's look at each product that's kind of showing up? It's almost like the patent office, So how would you have a review organization that's kind of saying, what are the regulatory issues? And because government is absolutely not moving fast enough, and it's going to come faster and faster. So how would government start responding to that? And again, the make to manufacture bridge to get stronger. So, how do we manage those disruptions? And I threw this one in with my Department of Labor friends. So registered apprenticeship, how do you get the employers engaged in training? So part of our program is we just train to the point of placeability, but could there be a federal tax credit program for startup firms? You're going to hire your first 8 people. What would it look like to get a tax credit? Now you could say his revenues may not support a tax credit, but just like the R&D credits that I know we have in our state, can those be sold on a marketplace so that again those startups could get supported? So they are doing job creation. They're definitely doing job training. This is training for the next generation technology here. So what would it look like to get federal, all of our startup employers some funding on a federal tax credit program for an actual registered apprentice training? So to us, the comprehensive set of solutions is how do you marry education, workforce development, economic development, business development, and make sure that it is engaged in the community. We're really proud of the fact that Most of the folks that we've trained who were unemployed and dislocated came out of community, mimic our demographic makeup with the exception of female. We had 26% female in who we've trained. Typically manufacturing is 4%. So we're proud of that higher number. And we had 28% minority in a town that has 28% minority. So we tried to mimic the demographic makeup of our community and work with the local underserved population in our youth program. So it is, how do you develop kind of an operating system that's very comprehensive as a single solution? So these are the segments that we created. So again, if we're going to compete globally in the next industrial revolution, the idea is also not city to city, right? But what is the role of every city? Could Youngstown become the bio center of the future? Who's going to do bio parts, right? Who's going to do all? So there's enough room for everybody, and this is a localized economy. Craft beer, you don't have a new craft beer person saying, darn, there's another one showing up. I mean, I kind of look at the craft beer stats and say, well, could have another craft beer in the universe of craft beer drinkers, because what you're cutting into is more the mass market, not necessarily each other's market. And we should look at it this way and absolutely say, how is there room for everybody? So on that note, thank you very much.